With The Matrix Resurrections mere days away from release, I'm feeling a little nostalgic. In 2003, I was a 14-year-old kid experiencing movie hype like I'd never had it before. The Matrix Reloaded ended on a mind-blowing cliffhanger that was the talk of the lunch table at school. When Revolutions finally came out and that final showdown between Neo and Smith began, my hands were literally shaking from excitement. And I have to admit, The Matrix Resurrections has me feeling some small piece of what I felt back then. I know what a lot of you are thinking. Why get excited for this movie when the other sequels, Revolutions especially, disappointed? The Rotten Tomatoes score for Revolutions is a measly 35%. That's only 9% more than the first Suicide Squad. And by the way, if that has you hesitating to rewatch the old movies, but you want to revisit them, check out my recap. Just click the card in the upper right corner. But despite all that, I'm still hyped, and I'll tell you why. First off, I'm in the camp that thinks Reloaded is a solid movie, despite a few moments of iffy CGI, like why doesn't Neo's trench coat have more texture here? There was some amazing action in this movie, and besides the action, it did what any good sequel does. It expanded the world in interesting ways, in both plot and themes. From a plot standpoint, we got the major revelation that Neo isn't the first one. The entire messianic prophecy and Zion itself are all part of the system of control. We learn that Neo's powers somehow extend beyond the Matrix, we see Zion for the first time, and there are werewolves in it. Remember the Merovingians' guards? Persephone needed silver bullets to kill them. And these weren't just interesting plot developments. There was real emotional fallout too. Neo is usually pretty calm and collected, but Morpheus is shaken to his core by some of these revelations. He believes in the prophecy of the One with religious conviction, and I'll never forget this moment when he learns it was all a lie.
I have dreamed a dream, but now that dream is gone from me.
Thematically, the Wachowskis also give us a lot of interesting things to ponder. For example, in the first Matrix, Neo is presented as a pretty traditional messianic figure, in the sense that he's prophesied to be a hero for all of humanity, and by the end of the film, he seems entirely ready to take on that role. But Reloaded turns that on its head when Neo chooses love for one particular person over his broader love for humanity. Neo also retains a healthy degree of skepticism over his role as the Messiah. This is another memorable moment for me.
Neo, please. I have a son, Jacob, aboard the nose. Please, watch over him.
I'll try.
I have a dog.
We also get the revelation that not all machines are bad. It turns out the Oracle is not human, but is a seemingly benevolent software. What does that mean for what Neo is supposed to do? In the first movie, his goal was clear: destroy the bad guys, get free of the machines. But things aren't so clear anymore. Reloaded gave us all of that, despite its flaws, which it definitely had. For example, as awesome as the fight scenes are, they don't have quite the same weight they had in the first movie. In the original, Neo is an underdog against the agents. Morpheus tells us that no one has ever faced one and lived. So when Neo fights Smith and stands his ground, it was a triumphant moment. In Reloaded, Neo is far more capable, and when he spends 10 minutes fighting an army of Smiths, only to fly away at the end, we're left to wonder why he bothered fighting at all. It ends up feeling a little video gamey, like Neo is just battling Smith for fun to pass the time. It can also feel a little expository at times with monologue after monologue. But all in all, it was a solid sequel that delivered the mix of action and philosophy we loved in the first Matrix, while expanding on both. Revolutions, on the other hand, was far more disappointing. The setup from Reloaded with an army of Sentinels digging toward Zion was a great backdrop for both movies. It created a doomsday clock for humanity that you felt ticking every time we cut to them. But the payoff, which takes up a good portion of Revolutions, was just not that great. The battle with the Sentinels was boring compared to the beautiful choreography of hand-to-hand combat inside the Matrix. But even worse, there was no one we really cared about on the battlefield, only a few minor characters that we didn't spend enough time with to truly form a connection. So my experience in these scenes was just a sensation of waiting to get back to the stuff I really cared about, Neo and Trinity's journey into the Machine City. As much as the Zion stuff personally disappointed me, Neo's story didn't. I loved his entire arc in the movie and thought it presented some bold choices for the Wachowskis. I was on the edge of my seat waiting to see what we'd find at the Machine City the entire time. This moment where Trinity is given a glimpse of the sun above our scorched earth is one of my favorite cinematic moments ever, and it's one I've thought about often. I thought Trinity's death scene was well done and pretty moving. Then there's the bold choice of revealing the machines as beings of light, as if they represent something spiritual, rather than the purely malevolent force we met in the first movie. And of course, we can drum up a plot explanation for this. Neo's powers extend beyond the Matrix, so we can assume his mind somehow communicates wirelessly with the machines. We know humans are created with plugs, allowing them to interface with the simulation. So it's not a leap to imagine the machines left something inside humans that would allow for wireless connectivity. Finally, with Neo physically blind, his senses interpret the machine signals as light. But the Wachowskis clearly presented this light as something awe-inspiring for Neo. So, on the meaning level of the film, it seems to be saying they do represent something like spirit. And the final bold choice is that Neo wins, not by defeating the devil, but by merging with him. I've said the phrase bold choice a few times now, and that is one of the best things I can say about these movies. I've seen a lot of movies, and if you watch this channel, you probably have too. So I imagine that a lot of you are like me in that you crave bold choices. You want to see things in movies that you haven't seen before, and that is one of the reasons I'm so hyped for Resurrections. I wouldn't consider Revolutions a particularly good movie, but I appreciated enough of it that it made the experience worthwhile, because the Wachowskis made those bold choices. The movie tried to do something different, and it was thought-provoking enough that even years later, I still think about it. Basically, what I'm saying is, even if Resurrections isn't good, it'll still be good, because I believe that Lana Wachowski, now directing on her own, wouldn't have returned if she was planning to shoot something conventional. I fully expect to see more bold choices and thought-provoking questions, all led by a John Wick-era Keanu Reeves. Lana also said something recently which reminded me of another sequel to a long-dormant franchise, Creed. Of all the legacy sequels, as they're being called, Creed is the one that was most successful for me personally, and I think that's largely due to the reason it was made. It wasn't because a studio backed a truck of money up to Stallone's house. It was because filmmaker Ryan Coogler had an idea and a vision for a movie about Apollo Creed's son. He pitched it, and the studio went for it. The movie came from a place of passion, and when that happens, movies become art. The Matrix Resurrections also comes from a very personal place. In a recent interview, Lana Wachowski said this: "My dad died, then this friend died, then my mom died. I didn't really know how to process that kind of grief. I hadn't experienced it that closely. You know their lives are going to end, and yet it was still really hard. My brain has always reached into my imagination, and one night, I was crying and I couldn't sleep. And my brain exploded this whole story, and I couldn't have my mom and dad, yet suddenly, I had Neo and Trinity, arguably the two most important characters in my life. It was immediately comforting to have these two characters alive again. That is not the description of a money grab sequel. That's the origin story for a work of art from someone with a personal vision, which is going to be presented as a sci-fi, kung fu, special effects extravaganza. That's enough to get me hyped. But now let's talk about the trailers. First off, I love that these trailers seem to show us plenty without really telling us what the movie is about. The first trailer gives the impression that Neo is somehow alive in the rebooted Matrix we saw at the end of Revolutions. He's back to just being Thomas Anderson and has no memory of the original trilogy, but he's starting to wake up, and maybe Trinity is too. Then the second trailer leans very hard into the concept of repeating cycles. We see tons of callbacks showing how everything old is new again, and things get very meta. We see Neo essentially watching clips of the original Matrix on a big screen. The second trailer also shows a bit more of the real world, and we see Niobe. I really liked seeing her, because if there was one thing that bummed me out about the first trailer, it was the lack of returning cast members other than Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss. Niobe mentions war, so the story might start in a fairly straightforward way. Revolutions ended with a peace the Oracle knew was temporary. So maybe the peace has just reached its natural conclusion and it's time for more war. But then we get this line.
So deja vu, and yet it's obviously all wrong. Maybe this isn't the story we think it is.
And that's another reason I'm so hyped. Both trailers introduced so many questions that already have me intrigued. Like that line about deja vu. What does it mean? It really gives a feeling that this movie will somehow recontextualize the original trilogy. Like maybe things didn't happen exactly the way we remember them, or there was just more going on than we realized. Then there are so many other questions. The obvious one is, how are Neo and Trinity alive? I think the assumption for many of us was that although their bodies died in revolutions, perhaps their minds were downloaded into the Matrix. But the trailer clearly shows their biological bodies alive. Does that mean the machines have advanced technology capable of physically resurrecting them, or maybe cloning them and inserting them back into the Matrix? Or was the real world that we saw in the first Matrix not the real world at all, but just another Matrix, as in a Matrix within a Matrix? I've personally never subscribed to that theory, and it's one of those ideas that's not really provable either way, but who knows? Other questions. Why does Morpheus now look like Yaya Abdul Mateen II rather than Lawrence Fishburn? Maybe he died after the original trilogy, like he did in The Matrix Online, which was intended to be canon, so he now only exists as software. And like the Oracle in Revolutions, he now has a new shell. Similarly, why does Agent Smith look different? Assuming this is the new Agent Smith. One bummer is that, according to Hugo Weaving, he was supposed to return for Resurrections, but scheduling conflicts prevented it. So whatever explanation we get might just be a throwaway line to explain the recasting. Again, assuming it is a recasting, as the trailer implies. If Agent Smith is back, is he once again an agent of the Matrix, or is he still rogue? And have his goals changed at all since he exploded in Revolutions? And just, what is the overall plot of this movie? The second trailer makes it seem like Neo is fighting for Trinity.
If you want to see Trinity again, fight for her!
And it seems in the real world that he's free while she's still in her pod. So is that the premise? That Neo is fighting to free her? Why does Neo see himself as an old man in the mirror? And why does he have a duck on his head? I just have so many questions that I can't wait to see answered. It really reminds me of the hype I felt after Reloaded. I couldn't wait to find out how Neo stopped those Sentinels, or what Agent Smith would do now that he's in the real world. Now, to be honest, I didn't find the conclusion to either of those questions particularly satisfying at the time, especially the Smith in the real world subplot. But the hype, waiting for the answers, was through the roof. And like I said before, I still found enough of the movie compelling and satisfying. By the way, the action in these trailers looks awesome. Lana directed the action herself, but we also know that Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, the John Wick choreographers, helped out. As an aside, they were also stunt performers in the original, so it's no surprise that the action looks as great as it does. Now, it is hard to get a great look at the action from these trailers, because it does that super fast cutting thing you often see in trailers. But what I'm hoping is that this basically feels like John Wick, augmented by science fiction. You would think that with 2 decades having passed since The Matrix, action would just be totally commoditized by now, where everyone makes great looking action. But that is not the case. In fact, after seeing John Wick, The Raid, and Mad Max Fury Road, it's almost impossible for me to enjoy any of the action in standard Hollywood movies. Like pretty much anything in the MCU. Typically, standard action is either so CGI heavy that my brain just interprets it as a video game, or it's real but has so many fast cuts to cover for stunt performers that I can't even tell what's going on and lose interest. So any movie that shows me clear and real looking action already has a major leg up. But if you then augment it with the Matrix's sci-fi elements, I get hyped. And I don't need this movie to revolutionize action the way the original did. It's hard to imagine how they could do that again. All I want is competent hand-to-hand combat with superpowers, including Neo's new Force Push, which they show so many times in that second trailer especially. It seems like they're really proud of it. Now, there are a few things that have me tempering my expectations, which I'll quickly mention. In that first trailer, the blue pills, Neil Patrick Harris's blue-rimmed glasses, the song lyrics about pills and Alice.
One pill makes you larger, and one pill makes you small, go ask Alice.
Then a shot of the Alice in Wonderland book all felt a little on the nose, as in symbolism that's way too obvious. Like in the original Matrix, blue pill became synonymous with people still plugged in. But people weren't taking blue pills to subdue them. It was more of a metaphor because that was the color of the other pill that Morpheus offered. But here, it looks like it's become very literal, with Neo literally taking blue pills, maybe to suppress his memories of his true identity, and the true nature of the Matrix. And yeah, I defended Revolutions a bit, but don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a good movie. So if this ends up being more like Revolutions than the original, or even Reloaded, that will be disappointing. But I don't think that's gonna happen. Look at this, and that. This movie looks really cool. I can't wait to find out what the actual story is. I can't wait to see the action in context. And I can't wait to see if this will be a closed story or if we're potentially opening the door for more installments. How great would it be if this movie turns out awesome and we get another trilogy, but this time all 3 of them are good. And they perform so well at the box office and on streaming that in conjunction with Dune's success, it opens the door for a whole new era of intellectual sci-fi. What was I saying about tempering expectations before? Anyway, I can't believe it's 2021, and I'm excited for a new Matrix movie, and it's only 2 weeks away. I really, really hope it's good. We'll see, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the rest of my Matrix coverage. We'll most likely live stream after we see the movie, so you won't want to miss out. With that, thank you for watching, and see you on the next One Take.